I love to have on my Democratic friend. Senator Chris Coons is one of them from Delaware. Senator Coons, welcome. I don't know if you heard Angus King was on last hour. I guess it's Democrat Day on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
I'm glad to be joining you, Hugh, and glad to know that I'm following Angus King, independent senator from Maine. He's been a great and a colleague, someone who's got good sense and represents his state well.
He does. We were talking about phase four, which I'm going to talk about with you because I think the Cybersecurity Solarium Commission has recommendations which could fit into a phase four bill. You want to talk about national service in phase four. I will get to that in just a second, but I'd like to open up with a curveball. First of all, though, are all the Coons healthy? Everybody doing well on Team Coons?
Yep, safe and healthy. Like many American families, we're enjoying having our college-age kids home, but it's a big disruption for them, a challenge in terms of figuring out their path forward, and we are all concerned about our parents' health. My mom, who is in a assisted living facility, is healthy and safe, but frankly, like millions of older Americans, going stir crazy after months of lockdown. So,
well, that's troubling,
just
Senator.
If I could, a brief prayer and thank you for everybody, the nurses, the orderlies, the doctors, the paramedics, everybody who's responded so bravely to this pandemic. We've lost a lot of them. There has been not one case of COVID-19 in the place my mom lives, and that's a result of some really great work by the folks who run that place.
I was just going to say, not one prayer, but repeated prayer. The assisted living facilities have been particular hotspots, so I'm sure you're a little bit worried or a lot worried about that. How do you stay in touch with the facility? How do they let you know?
Well, I talk to my mom almost every day. We occasionally have done Zoom chats as a family, but mostly it's just by phone. And we occasionally talk to the administrators. We've gone out about once a week, my brothers and I, just to drop off, a basket of different things, books to read, puzzles, snacks. And they have a very orderly procedure. I don't get within a quarter mile of her. I mean, they essentially irradiate the whole thing, and you don't touch anything. You don't really talk to anyone, and it's a very well run place, and I know that's a blessing. I'm also gravely worried about the hundreds of thousands of Americans who are living in facilities that have struggled to get access to personal protective equipment, where the staff are risking themselves and exposing their own families. This has been a very tough pandemic, and Hugh, we're going to get to probably 100,000 Americans whose lives have been lost sometime by this weekend, and I think it's worth a national moment of remembrance and reflection to thank the folks who are, on the front lines, as I mentioned, the nurses and doctors and orderlies, but also the essential employees, the bus drivers and the people who clean offices at night and the grocery clerks who've kept going to work, even though that meant risking exposure, and in a number of cases has led to their being falling sick and dying from COVID-19.
Amen to that. And I think I speak for the entire audience. Everyone joins you in that. That's a bipartisan point of view. Now, I want to talk about...
It's a nonpartisan point of view, I think.
I want to talk about phase four, though. Leader McConnell is quoted this morning as saying there definitely will be one. I know Title I is going to be aid for the states, and Title II is going to be liability reform to prevent people from the plaintiff's bar. Titles 3 through X depend upon what bipartisan agreement exists. Angus King and Mike Gallagher were here to talk about cybersecurity, and I think that should be a title in this. I know we need about $25 billion in defense spending just to make up for COVID-related costs in acquisitions and in some cyber stuff and some Pacific stuff. You want a national service title. Tell me about that.
Well, we already have a bipartisan bill that's got more than 90 co-sponsors in the House and the Senate. In the House, we've got some senior Republicans, folks like Tom Cole of Oklahoma and Hal Rogers of Kentucky, who've joined David Price of North Carolina, Dr. Kim Schreier of Washington, Chrissy Houlihan of Pennsylvania. There are dozens. I probably shouldn't start listing them all. Doris Matsui of California. There are dozens of co-sponsors. Here's the idea, simply put. Right now, today, every state in the country has a commission on volunteerism and service that is appointed by the governor that pulls together local nonprofit leaders, philanthropic and foundation leaders, and private sector leaders I served on the commission here in Delaware many years ago. In fact, it's how I met my wife. And those commissions are able to flexibly respond to the local needs and work with mayors, governors, the private sector, nonprofits. Today, there are 75,000 AmeriCorps members serving in every single state in programs that are locally driven, locally funded, matched by the federal government. I'd like to see us double that number to 150,000 and then double it again the next year. We have more than 33 million Americans unemployed. And for a younger generation, they see their country under attack by this pandemic. And like the 9/11 generation, where thousands and thousands of them stepped forward, signed up, and served in the global war on terror, I think we should give a younger generation of Americans an opportunity to show what they can do, to be engaged in testing and tracing, and God willing, soon enough, vaccination, to help with hunger and food banks, and to bring in some of the crops and move them to markets where people are looking for food, to help in some ways with the education gaps that have emerged because students have missed a semester in the spring and may have to miss some of a semester in the fall, and to do work in our national parks and on public lands like what the Civilian Conservation Corps did during the Great Depression. AmeriCorps comes with a very modest stipend. They make $15,000 a year, and they earn something for college. I think it's a great way to say to young people, if you do a year or two of civilian national service, you should earn something for your education and your future. And the bill would both increase the numbers and modestly increase the living stipend and the education award. Early next week, I'm expecting I can announce a bipartisan bill in the Senate with two senior Republican senators who will be joining me in making this part of the title of that next bill. And I'm optimistic that this is going to get broad support because we can respond and recover to this pandemic with a younger generation. Frankly, they don't have to be young Americans. They could be of any age, but with a new generation that's willing to come together and to help do some of the service that gives us a better sense of who we are as Americans.
Now, Senator,
partly my view on this, forgive me, one last sentence if I could. My father grew up a white Protestant kid from Boston. He went and served in Germany in the 1st Infantry, and he told me my whole life his sense of what it meant to be an American came from that experience of having a platoon of people from all different backgrounds from all over the country for whom he was responsible, where they relied on each other, they served alongside each other. And I think this could also be, this national service moment, an opportunity for us to get to know each other and to serve together in the interest of our nation and our communities.
I was going to tell you, General Stanley McChrystal has been a guest on this show occasionally in this studio. Mark Guerin, my closest friend in the world, they're both on the Aspen Institute Franklin Initiative, which are big proponents of national service, the expansion you're talking about. It is a nonpartisan, bipartisan effort. But if I were a member of the Senate, I would look you in the eye on Judiciary Committee and I would say, you, Senator Coons, have to walk across your caucus to Senator Harris and Senator Feinstein and deliver a few district court judges for California like Mark Scarsi and Rick Richmond because we have 17 vacancies. We can't expect bipartisanship if the district courts of California, because of the blue slip, are empty. I mean, litigants are denied basic justice because there aren't judges, and typically that's never happened. It hasn't happened in Delaware. It hasn't happened in a lot of places, but Senators Harris and Feinstein won't move people like Scarsi and Richmond, who are completely apolitical judges. So an appeal for bipartisanship, if linked with bipartisan action on district court judges, I think has enormous resonance. But it's hard to get one without the other, in my view, Senator Coons. How do you respond to that?
Hugh, there are, it's funny, there are more things that are happening in a constructive and a bipartisan way than the general public sees. I'm on the Small Business Committee. One of the key things that we tried to do, that we did do in the CARES Act 2 months ago, was launch this new PPP or Paycheck Protection Program. A huge amount of money has been distributed to small businesses and nonprofits through it. Senators Rubio and Cardin, a whole group of us came together at the end of last week to move bipartisan fixes to that PPP program. I am working on a judge's bill. I cannot give you the details right now, but a bipartisan group of us is trying to figure out a path forward on judicial nominations that's sustainable. I have voted against many of the recent circuit court nominees for a variety of reasons, but mostly because either they were deemed not qualified by the ABA or they had ideological positions way out of the mainstream. District court judgeships are often a different thing, and I have voted for many of them. As you know, here in Delaware, we have two district court judges where vacancies came up 2 and 3 years ago, and we were able to fill them in a way where my senior senator and I worked with the White House, worked with our local bar, got people who are competent, qualified, nonpartisan, and they're currently serving. I would hope that's possible, but bipartisanship on the judiciary has been particularly difficult to reach in this environment.
It's just so unfair to litigants. And I mean litigants who are Democrat, Republican, nonpartisan, all shapes, sizes, ethnicities, backgrounds. They can't get their cases heard because of these blue slips. And again, I'm not talking about circuit court, high profile, knockdown, drag out ideological fight. I'm talking about the people who hear motions in civil cases and property condemnations and criminal proceedings, and people like Rick Richmond, Mark Scarsi. There's a long list of them. They just need to move, and I'm hoping you'll do that. Let me close by asking you, Senator, about China. You're a serious China watcher. You and I have done events together. The CCP seems out of control. They are fomenting a crisis on the Indian-China border right now. Will Phase 4 include some plus-ups for defense? I believe it's about $20 billion that the national security team says they need for cost overruns related to COVID, an additional Virginia-class submarine. Are you in favor of that as well?
I am likely to support increased investments in our preparedness. We are in a global strategic competition with China. I was pleased to support the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act last year.
Yes,
Was
yes.
pleased to see President Trump sign it into law last November. And I think the actions of the CCP against Hong Kong are going to demand a response from the United States sooner rather than later. I traveled last year to Taiwan, to mainland China, to South Korea, and to Japan with a delegation just to make sure I had seen recently on the ground how these circumstances are playing out. And I'm gravely concerned about the future of Taiwan. I think we need to make bipartisan investments in our regional alliances, in our preparedness, and in our ability to respond should things suddenly go in a worse direction. But the actions of the CCP under Xi Jinping in recent years should have all of us gravely concerned.
Less than a minute, Senator. Would you support individual sanctions on Chinese billionaires who are moving effortlessly between countries if this national security law is put into effect?
Some sanctions in response to the law that's been proposed would absolutely be appropriate.
And on individuals so that they feel the pinch, because that's how President Xi gets incoming. He only hears from the billionaires.
I'd have to know what the basis is, but if that is a way to apply appropriate pressure on Xi and his regime, I would support it.
Senator Coons, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. The National Service.
Thank you.
Get those judges for me, and I'll support your service bill. Good old-fashioned log rolling.